the 2013 movie In His Steps, based on the classic book by Charles Sheldon, there's a scene where a rich girl and her friends start volunteering at a local soup kitchen. The rich girl is uncomfortable in the setting and is torn between doing what she thinks Jesus would and giving in to her fear and quitting. The man who runs the kitchen has this to say.
Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes or daily food, and one of you says to him, "Go. I wish you well. Stay warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs. What good is it? I was just like these people, you know.
Wait, you weren't...
I met a lot of Christian people who gave me spare change and those cute gospel tracts. But it wasn't until I found some that were willing to actually give me what I needed to survive and get dirty doing it that I could actually take the gospel seriously.
Compassion for those in need is a hallmark of Christianity. When it comes to homeless ministries, disaster relief, international aid, Christians have historically been at the forefront. And that's awesome because serving the world around us can be the single most impactful way of drawing people to Christ. Plus, it's commanded in Scripture.
But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth.
Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience.
But what about those who are already in the faith and are in need? What if someone is struggling with their identity or trying to get out of an abusive situation? Do we extend that same kind of mercy and grace to them? In this episode, we'll be hearing from two individuals who each found themselves at the mercy, or lack thereof, of their Christian communities. First up is Chris. Chris was raised in a conservative Christian home, but they now identify as spiritual. As always, I started off with the question, what are Christians? Which then led into what their worst experience with Christians has been.
I know that I probably have a lot of personal baggage around that, around the label of Christian. And so I always kind of try to offer with a caveat of that if I'm discussing Christianity to say, I probably have a lot of baggage around that, just because I didn't appreciate a lot of things about my own Christian environment. So when I guess emotionally think of it, then I'm oftentimes like, there's a lot of discomfort. I think a lot of judgment. But normally what I would try to say, removing my own bias and stuff, would be that objectively, I think it's really cool. I think it's about this. I think it's a religion based around Jesus of Nazareth, and all of his teachings around God and Jehovah and his own personal revelations about who God was and who he was in relation to God, the Son of God, and coming to save everybody and offering forgiveness for all, which is really cool. And I actually really love a lot of those teachings and revisiting them a little bit more now. I grew up in a place in a household that was homeschooled and home birthed and home everything. So, and also super traditional and conservative. And I just think the culture of my upbringing was the most damaging because I was a child, and I love my mom and dad, but it was that culture of the, restriction around gender and the restriction around self-expression and exploring your own faith and exploring your own identity and stuff that I think was the most problematic. When I eventually left home, because I wanted to date someone in Washington, and that wasn't my parents' plan for me. They didn't want me to do that. So when I first left home to do that, I didn't have much as far as the way of tools for social interaction, how to interact with the world. I was very scared because I thought I was maybe doing the wrong thing, leaving home. I thought it was the right thing, but still my, parents in my community might be saying, no, you should wait at home and, let your parents approve who you're going to date and all that stuff. In Washington, I went to stay with this family who was being really sweet. They were also really conservative. I still was back then. And then the mom found out that I was queer, like, because I was already into girls. And at the time I thought of it as like a struggle and something I had to work on. And honestly, also just struggling with like having a thought life around like sexuality at all was a struggle for me. Because another way that I think that culture failed me is just like I thought I was just like literally not supposed to have any sexuality at all, you know, until marriage, I guess. I just didn't really have a lot of direction around it, but I literally thought that I was like sinning for even having any desire at all, you know. And then on top of that, it's like queer or it's gay. So I was having that issue. My boyfriend was actually trying to help keep me accountable because we were both like courting very pure and, well, what we called pure back then, like no touching and like no holding hands and stuff, just like seeing each other, seeing if we were going to get married. And then we were kind of trying to keep each other accountable, like that we didn't watch porn or do anything we weren't supposed to do, right? I was staying with his family, and one morning I was just like crying while I was washing the dishes because I thought I was just like, I'm trying so hard to like be pure, and I keep having these like thoughts, and I didn't know any kind of healthy way to think about that at all, you know? The mom, like walked up to me when I was crying at the sink, and she was like, you know, what's wrong and everything. And I was like, can I talk to you about something? Because I didn't have any other guidance in my life besides previously my parents. And I was a little bit estranged from them at that point. And I told her, you know, because back then I thought, oh, well, if you're honest, surely like people will like help you and stuff. Like, I know I'm trying to do the right thing, you know? And then she was like, okay, yeah. And at first, initially, she seemed like she understood and she was like being sympathetic. Like, I can tell you're like a good person, like all these things. And like, you know, maybe I could find some resources for you or something. But then the next day she came over to like me and my boyfriend at the time and was like, we've decided actually that like you're a danger to our household by staying here, and like you have to leave. And like I didn't have a job and I didn't have a social security number because my parents like lived off the grid, and so I was very powerless in that situation. Like I was staying with family because I couldn't get an apartment or a job. And so her kicking me out was like, I was like, well, what do I do? Like I can only rely on friends and family, and I don't have any friends. And any friends that I am making is in this Christian circle. And if they're finding out that I'm queer, then I literally don't have anywhere to go. And she also said, she was part of their church, like his family's church. And she said, if you try to stay with any other family in this church, I'm going to tell them. And they will like, yeah. And I'm going to tell like everybody. And they lived in this like small town, you know? And I also felt a lot of shame about it back then. You know, I thought I was doing something wrong. And so I was just freaking out, and I was like, I can't even rent an apartment. Like, I can't even just go like, well, I'll just go get a job and rent an apartment. I can't even do that. And thankfully, we had like dinner with him and his mom, and like, he asked if it was okay if we told her what was going on. He said she'll understand, and then they decided to like let me stay with them for a little while. I was so scared to even talk to her about it because I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen, and like, I could just be left like out here in the middle of Washington if they decide, no, actually, you are too much of a mess and dangerous and you can't be here. Then I would just be like stuck in this town by myself in Washington with like no social security and like no anything, you know? So that's probably the worst. And I think that informed like who I trusted or who I talked to after that about like anything. I was like, well, can't trust these guys. I don't know. Like,
unfortunately, this incident was part of a series of events that eventually led to Chris abandoning Christianity altogether. But when I asked what their best experience with Christians had been, they had an interesting story to share.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this counts, but like I dated a Christian last year. It shocked me because they were an accepting Christian. They were a LGBT affirming Christian, and they were trans, and that just kind of confused me because I wasn't used to that. But being around them, like they invited me to their like youth groups, or there wasn't like a youth group, but like sort of a youth community group kind of things, and celebrate little celebrations with them. And I saw like the art they were doing around like making these stained glass windows that had a lot to do with like social justice around things that they thought the Christians in that church thought that they needed to be working towards. And I guess just seeing that church community that seemed really like they were thinking big picture. I didn't go to any of the services themselves, so that I still felt a little like baggage around like being in a church building, but being around them made me feel like they didn't have any vendetta. Like they weren't like trying to change your mind at all, and they seemed to have a real good understanding of like that cultures around the world all have their own way to like experience like the divine or their own path to that, or something. So I don't know. That was like really cool, and probably went a long way towards me being like, oh, maybe there's some chill Christians. I don't know.
I think this perfectly illustrates what happens when we let ourselves be controlled by fear or a refusal to understand the struggle someone is going through. People are naturally drawn to those that show them compassion and understanding. And when we as Christians fail to do that, it's going to push people away. Think about the story of the Good Samaritan.
Which of these three, do you think, proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise."
Remember, the person who showed mercy was a Samaritan, a group of people who were hated by the Jews of Jesus' time. Yet it was that hated, despised person who did any good for the person in need. Can you see the parallels to Chris's story? How often do we refuse to show someone mercy or compassion because they're too messy or we're scared by what they struggle with? Everyone's situation is different, but I believe the Bible makes it clear that as believers, we need to focus on caring and compassion for those who are struggling. Because if we don't, we could very well become part of someone's reason to leave the faith. Now, Katie, the next person I spoke with, has remained a believer despite a pretty traumatic upbringing. Her story is pretty graphic and disturbing, so in the interest of time and sparing you the gory details, I'll do my best to summarize her story. Katie grew up in a music ministry family that performed at churches all over the country. Behind the scenes, however, her childhood was defined by what she described as verbal and spiritual abuse from mean-spirited and hyper-legalistic parents. Over time, Katie became depressed and suicidal from the years of psychological trauma. When she was on what was to be her final ministry trip with her family, she was finally able to try to escape. But that was easier said than done.
I spend the ministry trip calling basically everyone I know, everyone I have a contact on my phone with, saying how, hey, I'm going to have to leave my home. So I'm either going to be on the street or like with someone. Because like at this point, I know like being on the street is safer than being in my home, which is sad. I'm just hitting dead ends. I'm getting a lot of, again, like wishing you well, but just no real offers because no one wants to jeopardize their relationship with my parents. And they know that it would if they helped their daughter.
Katie finally found someone who was willing to take her in, with her parents' blessing, because they had done ministry work together in the past. That person then went on to sexually groom and then assault Katie. Eventually, she was able to get away from that person by being admitted into a psychiatric hospital by her parents, who thought that her self-harm and suicidal tendencies were just the result of her being mentally unstable.
I'm assessed, I think, twice, and both times they're like, you're traumatized from abuse. And I'm like, well, that's not the answer my parents wanted. They're like, you've been abused your whole life. You're clearly fine. You want to kill yourself because your life's terrible, basically, right? I would literally walk out in the patio area because they would like let us out like dogs for like a smoke break. But like I didn't smoke, and there are plenty of people that tried to get me to smoke, but then some other people that realized how innocent I was were like, leave her alone. Like all these tough like ladies or whatever, like leave her alone. Don't offer her a cigarette. This is pretty funny. Like I even made friends in there. This is crazy. Like wherever I went, I seemed to make friends except for my family. In any event, like I would go on like the ice cold grass and just my socks. So like I didn't have shoes and like my feet would just be totally numb. Some of the residents, one boy I still remember him fondly in my heart. I still have the hoodie. He gave me a hoodie. It was like I didn't have a coat. This other lady like gave me her slippers, which they still let the water in. But like, again, this is like what I was saying about the whole like Christian stuff. Like those people, like these dirty, disgusting people that like the people in the church, they would consider these people dirty and disgusting. They were Jesus to me more than like most of the in quotes Christians that like I ever saw. Like they literally gave me their clothes. That was where I called my pastor. From inside the institutionalized place, I asked once again. I'd asked him repeatedly throughout all of this. I'm like, I don't have anywhere to go. They're about to release me. I can't go home. And in his head, I could go home. Like I'm like, I literally can't go home. Like that's more dangerous than on the street. Like I don't have any places to go. And he was like, no, I'm not jeopardizing my relationship with your parents, but I wish you well. Like that was the conversation basically. And so again, like that's kind of what I consider my worst interaction with a Christian, because like that was someone that like my parents, you could almost argue, aren't even Christians, so I try to be like, okay, maybe they are, but like that guy, like no, this was like a pastor. He didn't like have a history of abusing people as far as I know, but like no, he just like wished me well, and I think that's a terrible thing to do.
Thankfully, Katie was able to make it out of that facility, and she was rescued by one of her cousins. When I asked her what her best experience with a Christian had been, she singled him out with no hesitation.
He showed God's love to me by literally dropping everything, driving down, getting me physically from my situation and taking me into a better place. And he's continued to help me for over 2 years now. I still live at his place, have my own little room, and I feel like there are so many things that he's done that have shown God to me, but I feel like even just that first initial action definitely would count as the best interaction I've ever had with a Christian, because it shows they're not just like saying they have faith, like it shows they're having works with their faith.
Despite her heartbreaking past, Katie has remained a Christian. As we've seen from this series, that can't be said for everyone, so I just had to know what helped her keep her faith through it all.
I will say, as bad and traumatic as my life was, the couple things my parents did right was that they did introduce me to like the idea of a God at all. Technically, they did introduce me to Christianity, and also they had us read the Bible and like memorize scripture. So even though it was again for like the ministry, that was like part of the act, we would like quote scripture and like, wow, isn't it amazing? As spiritual as this sounds, it probably was that I did read the Bible so much. I read the Bible a lot and I prayed a lot, and I had the desire to know God. Like, seek the Lord and you'll find him, you know? It really does work that way. Like, if you don't care, you're not gonna find God, and like you will use any story as just an excuse to be an atheist.
I think it's important to remember that God's grace is greater than our pain, our trauma, or our failures. No matter what we've gone through, he is there, ready to catch us when we look for him.
And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who were called according to his purpose.
It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see that good on this side of eternity. But whether we've gone through trauma or we've repented of the trauma we've caused someone else, God can still work through it all to accomplish something good. And that should give us hope. In the next and final episode, we're going to tie it all together, hear some final thoughts from those we've met along the way, and see where to go from here. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. If you'd like to show this series to your small group Bible study, check out our resources at whatarechristtians.com. And be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our future videos.